There is a lore inconsistency in the Fallout series that has always intrigued me, only in a way that it bothers me, but it makes me want to delve deeper into it, see how the issues can be fixed. And like most conversations about lore inconsistencies, especially ones in the Fallout series, it's not very important to your enjoyment of the media, but I'm going to spend a long time complaining about it anyways. Fallout is a game series with several iterations, many iterations being handed off between multiple different teams of people with different knowledge and interests. Between these iterations, new content must be made to incentivize people to buy the new product. That means more lore, more weapons, and more lore for these weapons. In addition to that, some weapons may be omitted or changed. This creates a scenario where we now have 3 different weapons given the name Assault Rifle. Or we see the laser rifle completely change design between Fallout 2 and 3, and we don't see it revert back since. This video will take the time to both point out the many complications with these different weapons seen throughout Fallout, and attempt to offer an explanation for these complications using the lore we have. Within Fallout 1, 2, 3, 4, and 76, there are 3 different rifles that have been given the name Assault Rifle, each with different lore that adds some odd complications to the pre-war America's handling of guns. Starting from the earliest appearance, the Assault Rifle in Fallout 1 and 2 is the AK-112. The AK-112's description states that the gun is an old military model, out of use around the time of the war, meaning this rifle is strictly civilian. The next assault rifle seen in the games is Fallout 3's R91, which is the preferred weapon of the National Guard, which makes its abundance in the Capital Wasteland totally reasonable. Then we have the assault rifle seen in Fallout 4 and 76, which has no other confirmed name, but there is a theory to what the gun could be. In Fallout 3, there's a location called the Museum of Technology, and within it is a plaque that describes a gun by the name M199. The plaque reads, perhaps the most well-recognized weapon in the modern US military arsenal, the M199 earns its nickname the Backtalker from the unusual report the firing mechanism makes as it ejects a spent shell. Firing standard 5.56 rounds, the M199 is still the official infantry weapon of the US Army, on loan from the International Ordnance Museum. These cases display the various types of weapons and ammunition used by the military in the past conflicts all over the globe. Now, there are a few things here we can use to link this mentioned gun to the assault rifle found in Fallout 4 and 76. First is the ammunition. Both weapons fire 5.56mm bullets, while other guns do as well. This is the first characteristic that links the two guns. Another good point is that in Fallout 4's Creation Club, several paint job add-ons labeled the assault rifle in Fallout 4 as the M199. So far, we have a semi-complicated group of 3 different weapons, all titled the assault rifle, that each have their own lore. The AK-112 being the out-of-service rifle by the time of the Great War, that was mostly used by civilians, the M199 being the main ballistic assault rifle used by the military, and the R91 is used primarily by the National Guard. This raises a few questions regarding the places these firearms appear throughout the wasteland. These questions are: 1. Why does the M199 only appear in Boston and West Virginia so far? 2. Why is the National Guard only stationed in DC? 3. Why doesn't the National Guard use the M199? And 4. Why is the AK-112 only found in California? These 4 questions I will take time to answer now. As for the M199 only appearing in Boston and West Virginia, out of the other areas prominently featured in the mainline Fallout games, I'm excluding the DLC locations from this video unless needed. Every other area has a clear explanation as to why their assault rifle is prominent there. But Boston and West Virginia don't have a lot of lore for the military occupying those areas. We have small things, but nothing about the actual military structure, so it's inferred that the M199 is just their main assault rifle. To explain the National Guard only being stationed in DC, I have to go into some theory crafting about the society of the US and Fallout, and its relation to military recruit rates. My theory is since the National Guard is tasked with guarding the US, most people looking to join the army will probably want to go into other factions that will be guaranteed to see conflict. So since recruitment rate is lower, the government chose to send the National Guard only to defend the US Capitol, while having the other factions of the military act as home defense of the places their bases are stationed. For why the National Guard doesn't use the M199, I believe it's to cut costs. Plus, the gun is overkill for the purposes the National Guard have for the assault rifle. For the most part, the National Guard are going to deal with insurrections and riots. They don't need large firepower since most of their opposition are ordinary people. So they most likely just need a simple rifle. And based on the lore, the M199 is pretty advanced, so they may want to avoid using it when not needed to cut costs. On top of that, the body of the R91 is more wood and is also thinner, which means it can cost less to produce. With the AK-112 only being in California, my theory is that the laser rifle in the area, the Watts 2000, is actually the primary rifle of the military located in that area. Since it's the first area of the mainland of the US likely to be targeted by China, if they were to invade, it would presumably be equipped with the best, most effective weaponry, while the rest of the US get ballistics weapons and less powerful, more experimental energy weapons. Another oddity is the fact that Operation Anchorage, a simulation that covers the battle between America and China in Alaska, sees the R91 as the only ballistics rifle used by the military. Now, this is me basically fully jumping into one side of a camp of a debate that's been going on for a while about whether or not the simulation is a trustworthy source about the war. When I'm going to say no, it's not. It's not accurate. The R91 being there is only because the developers made the simulation in DC, and that's where the R91 is, and it's easily available there. So that's my assumption on why we see the R91 in Anchorage and not the M199 appearing instead. One final interesting thing involving the assault rifles we're looking at is that the R91 appears on the sign at the gun store Commonwealth Weaponry in the Diamond City Marketplace, which is interesting because the R91 isn't in the Commonwealth. Of course, the store owner Arturo Rodriguez may have just seen the weapon before and decided to paint it on the sign. Fallout New Vegas ditches the assault rifle name and replaces it with the assault carbine, a weapon based on the M4. This is interesting because the AK-112, the assault rifle of Fallout 1 and 2, is nowhere to be seen despite the Mojave's proximity to California, where we have seen the AK. On top of that, the NCR's presence in the Mojave also adds confusion since they came from California and used the AK-112 in that area, but it's nowhere to be seen when they go to the Mojave. Instead, we see the service rifle, which I will leave for another segment later because I'm going to cover the assault carbine and why it's introduced here and is only in this area. There is an explanation for these oddities, but they require bringing up some outside knowledge as well as some theory crafting. As for why the assault carbine is so prominent in the Mojave in the first place, we have to look at Josh Sawyer's Tumblr. For those of you who don't know, Josh Sawyer is one of the directors of Fallout New Vegas and seems to have at least a above service level interest in guns. On his Tumblr, he was asked, Fallout 3 establishes that the R91 assault rifle was the standard issue armament for the National Guard. Why then is it not included in Fallout New Vegas? I understand the lack of Chinese ARs, but it seems like the R91 would have been a better fit than the assault carbine. Josh Sawyer answered, the assault carbine is not standard issue. They are intended to be paratrooper weapons, which is why the boomers have so many of them. This explanation makes sense to me, and for the most part doesn't really conflict with pre-established lore. Of course, there is a conflict New Vegas created, and it's with the So far, this video has mainly dealt with the conflicts that exist in the pre-war lore of Fallout, while the one I'm about to cover exists only in the post-war lore. The service rifle, based on the AR-10 and 15 kind of put together, is best known as the primary weapon of the NCR in the Mojave. All service rifles are brought by the NCR, as the gun isn't local to the Mojave, so it calls into question, what about the AK-112? There are a few things we can come up with to explain away this oddity. This one I want to get out of the way quickly, because I don't really like it, and I don't think it's likely. This theory is that between Fallout 2 and New Vegas, most of the AK-112 stopped functioning. This can hold some ground, as the rifle was already out of service by the time of the war. Still, I don't think it's likely because we see many guns still functioning long after the war, and we have knowledge of people who can modify and repair said guns, that the AK-112 being the only gun we don't see in later games because of its maintenance problems seems unlikely. Instead, I like to propose a theory that I like a little bit more, and that is a budget issue. Since the AK-112 is fully automatic, and the service rifle is semi-automatic, it may be more cost-effective for them to send service rifles out to cut costs on ammunition and wear and tear on the gun. The NCR is already said to be cutting costs in the Mojave, so what they have chose to arm their soldiers with would probably presume to be cutting costs as well. As a little aside here, I just wanted to put this in sort of after I recorded all this. The service rifle doesn't have a lot of lore about like its gun's purpose, but my theory is that it's a civilian gun, similar to the AK-12, in that it was a gun given to people in a maybe a more gun-controlled area where they couldn't get full automatic weapons, so they're only given, you know, semi-automatic weapons. Similar to how in the U.S. you can't get a fully automatic gun very easily. My theory is the service rifle is a, you know, just semi-automatic version of the assault carbine, and it was dispatched a lot within a certain area, and the NCR happened to find that area and grab that, you know, just see a lot of those guns, and because it's a very cheap version of the gun that we already, you know, they already use, they decided to use that more for like less important excursions, I guess you could say. That also, I think, is why maybe the survivalist has a service rifle, because he bought it in a civilian manner to use recreationally, and maybe he was a paratrooper and he really liked like the assault carbine, so he bought a service rifle to, like, you know, use at home. Or maybe he just found it out in the wasteland. But also on top of that, I wanted to say that also maybe explains why the assault carbine is used by higher rank NCR soldiers, because they were sent with service rifles. Or maybe they had a few AK-12s, but they stopped working, or they're still like hiding somewhere. But they stopped working and they just strapped them for parts and used them on like service rifles and stuff. But, you know, since there's a high abundance of assault carbines, they decided to buy those instead and use those, you know, for their more important ranks, I guess you could say. Honestly, I'm looking way too deep into a thing that probably doesn't matter that much. I mean, I think this is the whole video, but like this especially, I feel like I wanted to add this as an aside, like kind of unscripted, just kind of talking about this, because I think it's interesting, like the actual lore implications of what the service rifle's purpose was as a civilian rifle, because I definitely think it was made as a civilian rifle. In Fallout 76, there are several weapon skins that change the appearance of the gun. The two that I'm looking at mainly right now are the Screaming Eagle and Tropic Lightning skin for the handmade rifle. Both of them are interesting because they take after the M4 and AR-15 style, like the Assault Carbine in New Vegas. While I plan on talking about the handmade rifle later, I think it's interesting to look at these gun skins and how they could impact the lore. I do think these skins are canon, but they're not relevant to this video. The existence of these guns don't exactly conflict with anything else that there is in the Fallout lore about the other M4 looking guns like the service rifle and the assault carbine. It's kind of similar to the real world, having multiple different styles of the same gun, mainly just different modifications and stuff to make the gun work better for different circumstances and specific needs for the people that use them. And while I do, like I said, think these guns are canon, like I said, they're not that big of a deal. That's the case with most Fallout 76 gun skins, in my opinion. I don't think that they really changed the, you know, canon of like a lot of the lore involving what those skins are meant to represent, especially the gun skins. Maybe some of the power armor skins are a little bit too weird, but for the most part, I think, you know, they are intended to have some canonicity to them. Of course, the process of changing the appearance of the gun is not the same. You know, a handmade rifle, which is an AK-style gun, does not just turn into an M4 based on a few modifications you make to it. It's instead just, you're like, these guns exist, but how they exist in the game is not how they exist in the universe, which you'll see kind of coming along in this video a lot, where, you know, the game and the universe are separate, but they still trying to tell the same thing. So now that we've gotten the complications of the assault rifle kind of cleared out for now, it's now time to move on to another weapon category seen in the Fallout series, the pipe weapons. Pipe weapons have been trashed a lot already, and while most of these complications revolve around the actual design of the guns, something that I don't see complained about often that drives me crazy personally is the lore about these guns. Mainly, why do pipe weapons only appear in Fallout 76 and 4? With 76 being the earliest in the timeline and 4 being the latest, it's completely rational to ask why we don't see these weapons appear in the other wastelands, and this is a question that I have an answer for, kind of. First off, it's important to note that these guns are pre-war designs, as the magazine Guns and Bullets has published articles about the use of these guns for criminal activity on the streets of Detroit. My strongest theory is that the strict gun laws in Boston led to the pipe weapons being mass-produced in that area, with the magazine seeming to imply that the guns are used mostly for criminal activity. It's understandable to believe that in high, dense, populated areas like Detroit and Boston, you will see an increase of people making homemade weapons to either skirt gun laws that might be in place, or personally, my best take is make a gun harder to trace. No serial number, no anything. You just make a gun out of a few pipes and screws, and boom, you have a lethal weapon that you can use maybe a few times, and not worry about if you drop it somewhere, it can be traced back to you very easily through a few purchases, or going to a shady gun sale that might end poorly for you. It's a safer option to get a gun that you will need to do crime while you can, not easily be traced by the police force. My assumption, though, is that West Virginia is actually the opposite, of course, like in real life, where West Virginia is pretty lax on gun laws, and, the area itself is a pretty, gun-positive area, if that makes sense, which you can kind of see replicated in 76 with the vending machines that produce ammo. Since this area is very lax on gun laws, it's easy to assume that maybe the guns were made for some crime, but also it could just be a bunch of gun nuts kind of experimenting with some fun designs they find in a magazine that would definitely be produced in that area, since, it's a very gun cultured area. The people there would definitely want to buy a magazine about guns, so it's just target audience that the magazine's producing for. Or maybe the survivors replicate it themselves because they see the magazine and think, this can help me make a makeshift weapon to help deal with the ghouls outside or whatever. The weird thing with Fallout 4 is that it's the latest in the series so far timeline wise, so definitely the pipe weapons that you see are not pre-war made. Maybe one or two that haven't been touched at all, but that's highly unlikely. Almost all the ones you probably find are going to be made, post-war, probably similar to 76, but still, it is without a doubt that they're post-war. It's just, people scrounging and making guns, Of course, I don't think you're supposed to think that every pipe weapon is the same, technically. They look the same, but they're not, actually the same, It's just a video game. But it's a really cool way of showing, people trying to survive in a wasteland. Moving on from ballistic-based weapons, we now will look at the energy weapons, primarily the laser rifle and the plasma rifle and plasma caster. Starting with the laser rifle, there are two different weapons that are named laser rifle in the Fallout series. The Watts 2000 in Fallout 1 and 2, and the AER-9 in every other Fallout. On top of that, the Watts is mentioned in a Future Weapons Today magazine, where it details an American sniper using the weapon in China. This is somewhat easy to explain away by saying that the Watts is the highest tech laser rifle in the pre-war, and that they were solely dispatched to people fighting in enemy territory, as well as the first place to be attacked by China if China were to do a full frontal invasion of the US. This also explains why the AK-112 is an out-of-service military rifle, and there are no other primary ballistics-based assault weapons in California. Of course, this doesn't really explain why we don't see any other areas post-war have the Watts, especially since Nevada is so close to California and a faction from California comes to Vegas, but it's the best explanation we've got. Now the plasma weapons get a little more complicated. So in Fallout 1 and 2 we have the plasma rifle, which in the lore, the weapon's real name is the Winchester P94. Of course, then Fallout 3 comes along and makes a new plasma rifle, the Urban Plasma Rifle, which then every other Fallout uses. The lore of this gun does bring up the P94 and says that it was made to replace the P94 as a smaller and easier plasma rifle, presumably for operations in urban areas. Then Fallout New Vegas and 76 introduced the P94 and call it the Plasma Caster. While being quite complicated, this does have an explanation already given, so it's perfectly fine. These are things I thought were interesting, but not big enough to make a full segment out of. Starting with the missile launcher, the one found in 3 and New Vegas is completely different design-wise from the one found in 4 and 76. And the one found in 3 and New Vegas has never been seen again after the change in 4. There isn't much lore on both versions of the missile launcher, but it's totally reasonable for there to be two different ones in different areas considering how complicated assault rifles are in pre-war America. Then there is the rocket launcher in 1 and 2, which looks different but at least has an actual weapon name besides just the rocket launcher. The .45 auto submachine gun, which appears in New Vegas and is later reintroduced in 4 as the submachine gun, which is then carried over to 76, has a box magazine in New Vegas on the stock version of the gun. You can modify it to have a drum magazine, But when it's brought over to 4 and 76, it only has a drum magazine as its available magazines, with bigger sizes being the modifications you can make to it. This can just be explained by a preference and resource capabilities of the people using these guns. This thing could be its own video, honestly, but for right now I'm just going to cover over it surface level wise. The real world names tied to guns with either the manufacturer, like Winchester being the maker of the plasma caster, or real world designations for guns like the AK-112 or the MP-10, both having real world designations like the AK or MP, like MP5 or AK-47. And the just straight up existence of real world guns like the FAL, P90, and Desert Eagle. Again, I'm going to make this its own video, but I thought I'd bring it up here just to make sure people didn't think I was forgetting it. Yes, it is odd that we have guns like the handmade rifle that is skirting the existence of the AK, and the Chinese rifle that both kind of skirt the existence of the AK, while the AK-112 exists that has the word AK in it. It doesn't look like an AK, but we'll get into that later. And there's an FNFAL, which is just a normal gun that appears in Fallout with, no changing to anything of it. It looks just like it. And finally, I like to look at the weapons that are either named AK or are modeled to look like an AK. Starting with the AK-112, based on what little detail the in-game images give this gun, it looks pretty far removed from an AK, most notably with a straight magazine. Then we have the Chinese assault rifle, the Type 93, and the handmade rifle, which both look very similar to the AKs we have in our real world. This could just be the low fidelity of the AK-112 model, not giving me much to work with, but it could also be the case that the AK-112 is a far more advanced version of the rifle over the two we see later on. Or perhaps it was an experimental model, which made several unpopular changes that were later went back on. So when I went over the R91, I left out something, and that's the Pitt. The Pitt is a DLC expansion in Fallout 3 that takes place in Pittsburgh, which is pretty far from DC, and the R91 is pretty common. In fact, it's so common that the gun has its own version in Pittsburgh, the Infiltrator. I assume this version was done post-war, and it's just a heavily modified R91 done by the raider gangs of the Pitt, and not a pre-war manufactured creation. The appearance of the R91 in the Pitt could be chalked up to trades between the regions, but then why does Pittsburgh have the R91 while Boston doesn't? In the time it took to make this video, the Pitt expansion came out for Fallout 76, and in that expansion we see the M199, the assault rifle of Fallout 4 and 76, appear in this area, and the R91 is nowhere to be seen, which adds plenty of complication. So much so, in fact, that I really don't know where to begin. Fallout 76 takes place before 3, so why does the gun disappear? And then why is it replaced with the R91? Is this a retcon? Or is this just a complete oversight in favor of spending less resources on making a new weapon for the area? Which I feel like would have been cool if the R91 was added to this expansion, and only in this expansion as a rifle you can find only used here. But instead we get this incredibly complicated scenario that is somewhat bothersome. We are nearing the end of this mess of a video, and before I go on, I want to go over my own thoughts to finish us off. Firstly, this isn't really a big issue for me. This is something interesting, but not like something I'm mad at. I'm not mad at Bethesda for muddying up the lore around the guns people use in Fallout, and of course you could just wave this all away by saying these guns exist all over the place technically, and you just don't see them in every game because the games don't happen to include them. Well, it's a fine explanation, and it neatly wraps up the possible problems created by omitting and adding weapons. I think it's fun to look at what the game writes about these guns and come up with theories on why you don't see these guns in the areas that they don't appear in. Also, all weapons with the same name in game, but in lore, have different names are not really a problem, especially since they are explained away. They all fit the category of the weapon name they are given, except for Fallout 1 and Fallout 2's plasma rifle, now being the caster, that doesn't fit the convention of a rifle. The main problem is when they conflict with the timelines and believable adoption. I did say in the beginning of this video that most Fallout lore inconsistencies are relatively unimportant. While I do believe that, I also think this one in particular is the least important. While others are signs of unoriginality, reusing the Brotherhood of Steel and mutants over and over, this one exists solely because people wanted to make cool weapons. So to wrap this up, let's address the thing that almost everyone would have said and just moved on. This doesn't really matter, and these inconsistencies were solely made so that developers can come up with new and cool stuff, for the most part, and I can't get mad at anyone for wanting to do that. So that was a long video that I've been working on for a while now, but I'm glad to say that this is the final crack in the dam that should lead to a more steady flow of videos coming to this channel in the upcoming weeks. Of course, it should be noted that not all content is going to be Fallout related. As you can see, my channel currently has Siege and Mass Effect related content, and I have many topics from all these games that I want to kind of write about. You know, Mass Effect, Siege, and Fallout, and more games that, you know, I haven't talked about yet, but I will in the future. I have plenty of videos already coming soon. As you can see, what I'm showing you, these are like scripts and assets that I've been working on. So maybe subscribe, I don't know. Be kind of cool if you did. Promise it'll be worth it. If you like this video at least, it should be worth it. Thank you and goodbye.